All right, it's Friday. It's the end of the week. It's the best day of the week, as we all know. But this week, it's just going to have to be the best day of the week because it's the end of the week. Normally, we would do our mailbag, but we're actually going to switch that up since there was news that came out of Pitt training camp yesterday. Pat Narduzzi had a couple newsy announcements to make on the final day of training camp. And I thought about it. I was like, well, I could just do a quick rundown of that and then jump into the mailbag. Then I was like, you know what? Let's spread it out. Let's start next week with the mailbag. We'll do the mailbag on Monday. Today we'll just talk about the news because I think the news is significant enough that it bears an extended discussion about some of the news that came out yesterday, primarily the fact that two players who were expected to be on the two deep are going to miss the season due to injuries. A couple of linebackers, Jeremiah Marcelin and Jayden Bonsu. You've seen the news by now. I think if you were on Panther-Lair.com, you probably had a feeling like that news was coming, and that's just kind of how it goes. But what does it mean for Pitt? What does it do to the depth chart? Well, how does it change the linebacker depth chart? How does it change the defense? How does it change what Pitt's plans might have been on third down? I think there's a lot to look into. And does it leave Pitt, obviously it hurts the depth, but does it leave Pitt's defense, in particular the linebacking core, in a worse position than it's been the last few years? Let's look at what the depth situation was like the last couple of years and what the depth situation looks like now heading into 2025. Some news, some season-ending injuries before the season even starts. It's the Friday edition of the Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, I really went back and forth about whether to make a whole episode about this today and or do, just a little bit of talk about the linebackers and then the mailbag. And I just felt like it's newsy enough. I mean, you have two season-ending injuries to two deep guys. I think it's worth talking about and discussing, particularly at that position group, because it was a position group that we touted for its depth all through the offseason. So it seems it seemed fitting to me to do that, and then we'll just have a little bit of extra time to get more mailbag questions in for Monday. We already have a bunch, and they're good questions. I look forward to answering them, but we'll just save it. We'll do it on Monday. It'll be a lot of fun. We can do that. But anyway, you know the deal. This is the Morning Pitt. It's youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com. You see the website below, Panther-Lair.com, the Pitt site on the 24/7 Sports Network, the place where you get all the Pitt sports news you can possibly handle. Pitt football, Pitt basketball, Pitt recruiting, Pitt transfers, Pitt everything, all at Panther-Lair.com, and Pitt message boards to talk with other Pitt fans about everything going on in the world of Pitt sports. If you want the best online community of Pitt sports fans that you're going to find, I think it's right there on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. And then our YouTube channel here, where we have lots of Pitt video content for you, these daily morning Pitt videos every Monday through Friday. A little bit of Pitt conversation to get your day started. Our weekly live show that we do every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. We had that this week. We did our over-unders on that episode. That was a lot of fun. We enjoy having those and kind of revisiting some of the over-unders from last year. And then we have we have post-game shows, we have press conferences, we have interviews, we have practice highlights, we have all kinds of video, all right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So make sure you like this video and subscribe, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You won't miss any of our Pitt video content right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And if you only listen to the audio version of this podcast, you're like, dude, I don't want to hear about the video. Well, sorry, this is primarily a video thing, so we're going to keep talking about it. But even if you're only listening on audio, you could go and, subscribe to the YouTube channel anyway. You should know the address by now. All right, so two season-ending injuries. Jeremiah Marcelin, upper body, as Pat Narduzzi termed it. Jayden Bonsu, lower body, as Pat Narduzzi termed it. Two depth linebackers, but reserve linebackers. But I think saying that sort of diminishes the role that those guys were going to have on this team. Because I think when you look at the linebacking core, I mean, you've got your big three of Kyle Lewis, Rasheem Biles, and Braylon Lovelace. And we all know about those guys. We've talked about those guys all offseason. They had a huge year last year, 40 tackles for loss among the three of them. What did they end up with? Like 16, 17 sacks between the three of them, 6 interceptions, 3 defensive touchdowns. I mean, just monster season from those guys. And that was with Braylon Lovelace not even in the starting lineup. We spent so much time talking this offseason about how those three guys together would likely make the best collection of linebackers Pitt has had under Pat Narduzzi, and potentially one of the best collections, maybe the best collection of linebackers, the best trio of linebackers Pitt has had this century. And I only cut it off at this century because I don't know who the 3 starting linebackers were in 1986. So I don't have that frame of reference. We need our friend Sam Shula to come in and give us a history lesson there. But I have a hard time imagining that you're going to find a better trio of starting linebackers than what Pitt is going to roll out there this year with Kyle Lewis, Rasheem Biles, and Braylon Lovelace. I think they're just that good. And we've talked about it all offseason. And nothing has happened in training camp to lead me to believe that those guys will be anything less than what we've built them up to be. I think the hype is going to match the expectations here. But the other part of the conversation, though, wasn't just about how good those guys will be and potentially great those guys will be. It's about how deep the position group should be this year. Because while they've had good linebackers, Servassier Dennis was the first really good linebacker Pitt had. You had some, I think, good individual performances. Even you go back to 2015, Mac Alambos and Mike Caprera put up nice stat lines that year. Kylan Johnson had a good year in 2019. But you get to Servassier Dennis in 2021, 2022, and you have really the first standout linebacker of the Narduzzi era. When you look at the defense, at least, it's really kind of the last position to get there. And up until last year, it was the only, Servassier Dennis was the only all-conference first or second team selection at linebacker at Pitt under Pat Narduzzi. And so finally, you got to that point in 2021, 2022, where you had a really good linebacker. And it sort of started a trend. Like, there were some good linebackers over those next few years. Maybe not as good as we expected them to be. Maybe not as good as I hyped them up to be. Bengali Kamara and Solomon DeShields. But good linebackers. And even you got into last year and you had, Kyle Lewis goes off for an All-American season and, one of the best overall stat lines of any Pitt linebacker in school history, one of the best stat lines of any linebacker in the country. I mean, there are only a few other guys you could really legitimately compare Kyle Lewis's stat line to nationwide and say, well, those guys were on the level that Lewis was on. I mean, I still maintain that if Pitt wins just a couple of those games down the stretch, last year, Kyle Lewis is the ACC Defensive Player of the Year. I think Pitt's success or lack thereof and struggles over the final 5 games of the regular season contributed significantly to him losing. Not that the defensive end from Boston College, whose name I cannot pronounce, not that he was undeserving of being named ACC Defensive Player of the Year, but I think, for one thing, he put up a lot of stats against Pitt. But I think if Pitt had won a little bit more, maybe finished 9-3 or even 8-4 in the regular season, Kyle Lewis probably gets ACC Defensive Player of the Year. I think he made a case for it all year long that he was the best defensive player in the conference. But so it goes. So you had last year, you had Kyle Lewis, really good. Rasheem Biles, really good. Brandon George had the best season of his college career, and they had Braylon Lovelace coming off the bench and even starting some of those games. Biles didn't start every game he played last season. And so you had Braylon Lovelace coming off the bench and contributing, 10.5 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks, or whatever it was, like that. Keith Thompson was all right, but he was hurt and missed time and that kind of thing. My point is, what you had is, even once they started getting some good linebackers at Pitt, they didn't necessarily have the depth. Last year, Braylon Lovelace was good depth, but that was kind of it in terms of an impact player coming off the bench, to give some reserve time or spell those guys and let them rest a little bit. And this was the other part of the equation about the linebackers coming into this year, that you had this great starting 3 and you had potentially some of the best depth that they've had at linebacker. And so Kyle Lewis last year, according to Pro Football Focus, led the whole team in defensive snaps with 838. That's crazy. 838 snaps. It's more than anybody in the secondary, obviously more than anybody on the defensive line where they rotate the most. But Kyle Lewis I don't even think Servassier Dennis in 2022 led the defense in snaps. Now, he only played 12 games, but Brandon Hill only played 12 games and he had 700 snaps. Servassier Dennis only had 635. So even like the best linebacker of the Narduzzi era up until last year didn't play as many snaps or as a high percentage of snaps, didn't lead the team in defensive snaps the way Kyle Lewis did last year. Rasheem Biles wasn't far behind, even though he only played 12 games. Braylon Lovelace played a lot. This year, they were supposed to be in a position to rotate those guys more, to give Kyle Lewis a little bit of a break, to give Rasheem Biles a little bit of a break, to give Braylon Lovelace a little bit of a break, or even to slide Jeremiah Marcelin into that middle linebacker role and let Lovelace play outside, which is where he got all his stats last season, playing that money linebacker, the boundary side of the field, the short side of the field. And so that's how that was supposed to be what took a really good, really strong position group into a great position group, is that they had these great starters and they have this really good depth. Now, the depth was somewhat unproven. Jeremiah Marcelin and Cam Lindsey, both second-year players, not a ton of experience. Jayden Bonsu had never played a snap at Ohio State in 2 years before he transferred to Pitt. But all indications were that Marcelin was good enough to be a starter. Cam Lindsey came, leaps and bounds throughout the course of training camp and was going to be ready to contribute. And Jayden Bonsu seemed to be doing really well. So it looked like you were going to be in a situation where those guys could give Lewis some rest, give Biles some rest, give Lovelace some rest. Not a ton, because you're not taking those guys off the field for all that long. But enough that maybe they're a little fresher at the end of games and a little fresher at the end of the season. Now you've kind of cut that out. That other half of what was going to make the linebackers so good in 2025, you've effectively taken that away. You've cut the legs out on that one, because now instead of having Lindsey, Marcelin, and Bonsu, now you just have Cam Lindsey. And Cam Lindsey's good. I think he's going to be really good. I think he's going to play a lot. He's going to be that backup star linebacker that plays to the wide side of the field. He'll give Kyle Lewis some rest, but your options are sort of limited beyond that. Now you're looking at, Nick Lappy, a former walk-on who's been a solid player for Pitt over the years, not really a contributor on defense, but solid special teams player. He's basically your top reserve at middle linebacker at this point. And that gets tricky. Now you're going to be counting on Braylon Lovelace to play even more snaps than you were before. You're not really going to have any option of sliding him outside and letting him play off the edge like he did last season when he was so productive. And you're just going to have, Biles and Lewis and Lovelace are all going to have to play a lot more than probably what you were hoping or expecting to have coming into the season. Now, like I say, over the years, the depth hasn't been that great. And it's interesting kind of looking back at last season, they had 11 linebackers take snaps with the defense, not counting special team snaps, but just snaps with the defense, according to Pro Football Focus. And that goes all the way down to and including Cam Lindsey, Jeremiah Marcelin, the other guy who was a freshman last year, Davin Bruton. Those guys all played a handful of snaps here and there. But 11 guys, 5 out of the 11 linebackers last year played 200-plus snaps. 4 played 400-plus snaps, which would have been Lewis, Biles, Brandon George, and Braylon Lovelace. And then 3 guys, Lewis, Biles, and George, all played 500-plus snaps. That was the same deal in 2023. They had 3 linebackers who played 500-plus snaps. It was Solomon Ishield, Shane Simon, and Bengali Kamara. It was even the same in 2022 with Kamara and Simon and Servassier Dennis played 500-plus snaps. Sort of the same situation in 2022 with the guys who played 400-plus snaps. Last year they had 4 guys play 400-plus snaps. In 2022, they had 4 guys play basically 200-plus snaps. They had, Simon, Dennis, and Kamara plus Tyler Wills played 397. Let's count it. Let's count it as 400, even though it's about 3 snaps short. In 2022, they had 5 linebackers play 200-plus snaps, which is what they had last year. I think there was a chance to get 5 guys over 300 snaps this year. I really think the rotation was going to be that deep that you were going to see that kind of playing time for Marcelin, for Lindsey, and potentially Bonsu. I think Bonsu might have been number 6 on that chart, although it does sound like he was having a good spring or a good training camp prior to his injury. So now you're just in a spot where you're not going to be able to rotate as much, and the depth has pretty much thinned out behind Kyle Lewis, Rasheem Biles, and Braylon Lovelace. You're never in a position where you say, well, it's okay if Lewis has to miss time or Biles has to miss time or Lovelace has to. That was never the case because those are 3 of the best players on the team. Now you're really in a situation where you can't afford to lose them at all. The other area this impacts, and I wrote about this on Panther-Lair.com yesterday, is the third down package, the Delta defensive sub package, that they've always used here. It's not really a nickel. What they do, they take a defensive lineman off the field, so they have 3 defensive linemen, and then in 9 out of the last 10 years or so, they've brought an extra safety in. So it's basically like 3 down linemen, 3 linebackers, 2 corners, and 3 safeties. And that extra safety would often almost play in what was sort of a linebacker role. It was almost kind of a 3-4 defensive look and defensive formation more than like a nickel. It wasn't a traditional nickel. They've done a traditional nickel on very rare occasions where they play like a 4-2-5 and bring in an extra corner. I remember they did that against Syracuse for a couple years, like 2017, 2018, somewhere around there. They would use that kind of nickel look, but they really didn't use it much. What they would mostly do on passing downs and passing situations over the years was this, on third downs, what they call the delta. And there was a possibility. What they did in 2021, when they did use this delta defense, instead of bringing in an extra safety, they would bring in an extra linebacker. And John Patrician, who was a former safety playing linebacker at Pitt, would fill in that role. They actually call it the star. I mean, they effectively look at it as a linebacker role, but they usually just put a safety in it. And so John Patrician would do that. And so it was really like a 3-4. There were 3 down linemen and 4 linebackers on the field. But after Patrician graduated, the last 3 years, they went back to having an extra safety out. So it was 3 linemen, 3 linebackers, 2 corners, 3 safeties. This year, there was talk that they would go back, they would use 4 linebackers again in that sub package. And the biggest reason why is because Jeremiah Marcelin was ready to step out there and contribute. They were comfortable with Kyle Lewis sliding out and playing that sort of hybrid linebacker safety role, and Marcelin could come in and be part of the 4 linebackers on the field. I think with Marcelin out, that changes that plan. And I think you're back to looking at a safety in that role. Probably Kavir Baines-Marquez, the transfer from UC Davis, and maybe eventually Josh Garrier, the true freshman sensation at safety. But this is another example of how when you have an injury like this, it doesn't just affect your depth and your rotational plans at a position, but it affects some of your other packages and personnel groupings that you're hoping to put together. And it really stinks because, again, you still have these guys who are really good in Lewis and Biles and Lovelace. But the position group as a whole could have been that much stronger with these other players still available and active. And now, maybe a true freshman like Justin Thompson's going to get some playing time out there. He's been working as a middle linebacker. Maybe he gets snaps. Now you're relying on a true freshman on the field, maybe in significant snaps or significant playing time. And that's not really ideal. That's not what you want to do, and that's not what you thought you would have to do. You thought you had some guys with a little more experience, a little more time spent in learning the defense. You thought you'd have those guys available to you, and they could do their job. You know what I mean? That there wouldn't be a huge drop off when they came in and some of the starters went off the field. So, but now that's out the door. And it's out the door right off the bat. Before the season even starts, you don't have that depth anymore, which is disappointing. They still have those top 3 guys. Those top 3 guys should all be really good, should all be able to make a case for an all-ACC performance this season, but they won't have that depth behind them. So we'll see. Oh, the other personnel news yesterday from Pat Narduzzi, I figure we should just throw this in here. Trey Butkowski, freshman walk-on kicker from Orlando, Florida, is going to be your starting kicker this season. Not James London, the transfer who came in from Murray State, came in on scholarship, transferred in January, was inconsistent through spring camp and seemingly through training camp, and ultimately lost the job to the freshman walk-on. James London also is no longer part of the Pitt football program. Draw your own conclusions on that one. But Trey Butkowski has worked with the same kicker, Adam Tanowski, Trey Butkowski, Adam Tunalski, different guy, different names and everything. But he's a kicker trainer who has worked with Ben Sauls and worked with I think Sam Scarton before him, and also works with Trey Butkowski, and had a lot of praise when I caught up with him about Butkowski. Thinks he can be a really good kicker. It's a true freshman coming in to kick at Acrisure Stadium, which I don't know if it's quite as tough as it used to be. But since they've closed up that open end more than it was when Heinz Field first opened. But either way, you've got a true freshman kicker leading the way now on placements. We'll see how it goes. And James London, fairly well right? He's taking off before the season even starts. He made it longer than Andy Jean, but only by a few months. So a little bit of personnel news from Pat Narduzzi yesterday, I figured we could talk about that here on the Friday Morning Pit. I appreciate everybody who tunes in. Don't forget, we'll have the mailbag on Monday, so you get a couple extra days to get your questions in. Go to the message boards at Panther-Lair.com, and you can submit your questions there, Panther-Lair.com. We'll have lots of training camp wrap-up coverage for you all through the weekend, so make sure you stay tuned for that. And then next week, by the time we talk again, it'll officially be game week. Pitt Duquesne, start of the 2025 season. It's almost here. You get one more weekend without Pitt football, and then you get a lot of weekends with Pitt football. So thanks for watching today. I appreciate you watching the videos all week. Make sure you like this video and subscribe, and we will catch up with you on Monday for the Morning Pitt mailbag right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.